The story is not the late night filing of the brief for Donald Trump's appeal to the First Department Appellate Division in New York to try to overturn his 34-count felony conviction, where a jury of his peers convicted him in the hush money cover-up related to Stormy Daniels and the business record fraud that was attendant to that. That's not the story. The story is who's on the brief. The story is why Sullivan and Cromwell, a major white shoe New York firm, is involved, and why is Robert Giuffra, who is the co-chair of the Sullivan and Cromwell firm, what's his involvement and the ethical issues related to it? Every major firm abandoned Donald Trump in 2020. He went back after 14 of them, got a $1 billion offer to do free legal work. Some of those law firms are forced to work on the tariff scandal. And yet Sullivan and Cromwell stepped forward and they've already been rewarded because one of their own, Jay Clayton, was a partner at Sullivan and Cromwell right around the time that Donald Trump selected Robert Giuffra to be his personal lawyer and his appellate lawyer and negotiating on behalf of the Trump administration. You see the conflict? Jay Clayton, one of Giuffra's partners, became the U.S. attorney in Manhattan. Ethics, anyone? I'll cover it here on Legal AF on Tuesdays. I'm Michael Popok. Take a minute, hit the free subscribe button. Sure, I've got the brief. There's nothing new in there. I don't care how many former Supreme Court law clerks filed this brief late at night to the Appellate Division First Department, of which I am a member, asking for it to be argued by Donald Trump's quote-unquote personal lawyer, Robert Giuffra, for 15 minutes at court. I've seen all these arguments raised before when Donald Trump's appellate lawyers were by the name of Todd Blanche and Emil Bovee, now in the government, now judges, and John Sauer, his appellate lawyer. There's nothing new here, but I want to get down to the ethical conflict of Robert Giuffra and how he and the fact that they have not they've decided to play fast and loose with who he's representing, because he stepped in March to help negotiate the first settlement between a major law firm, Paul Weiss, and the Trump administration, where Paul Weiss ended up, in order to avoid being put on a blacklist, by expressing their First Amendment rights and their duties as lawyers, negotiated a $40 million payment, or at least contribution of pro bono hours, free hours. And who negotiated it? Robert Giuffra at Sullivan and Cromwell. On behalf of whom? Must have been the Trump administration, but he was already Trump's lawyer by that time. So he's Trump's personal lawyer, and he's doing the bidding of Trump as president to negotiate against a fellow law firm. Now that law firm, Paul Weiss, was already represented by Bill Burke of Quinn Emanuel, a powerhouse litigation firm. And the other party that was involved apparently was Boris Epshteyn, Donald Trump's former and current private lawyer, who did not go into the White House and seems to be still working for Donald Trump on the outside. And they were negotiating, and suddenly Robert Giuffra, who's Donald Trump's private lawyer, enters the mix to negotiate on behalf of the federal government. Was he registered to do that? Was he authorized to do that? Was he confirmed to do that? He's just a drive-by stranger outside the government, negotiating on behalf of the government and for you and me as taxpayers. Where does he get off doing that? And then his law firm steps forward, right on cue, since he's like the only law firm in New York, in the powerhouse legal center of New York, that's willing to work with Donald Trump. Nobody wanted to touch him with a 10 or 20-foot pole after Jan 6th, after the insurrection, after Donald Trump's conduct. Rob Giuffre has the brass ones stand up and look the American people in the eye and say, Sullivan and Cromwell had to take this case. Let me just read it to you. How to take this case. His appeal is important for the rule of law, New York's reputation as a global business and financial and legal center, as well as for the presidency and all public officials. The misuse of the criminal law by the Manhattan DA to target President Trump sets a dangerous precedent. Who are you representing, Rob? I thought you represented Donald Trump, who wasn't president at the time he was convicted. He is a felon. And I'm seeing the same old shop-worn arguments I've seen before that have been rejected, and I'm sure are going to be rejected again. For instance, just looking at the brief, which I'll post on Legal AF Substack, they say that the conviction should be reversed because the law, the state law that they relied on to make this a felony was preempted by federal law about elections, and therefore federal campaign violations trump, no pun intended, the state element of the crime that made this case from misdemeanor to felony. Business record fraud is a misdemeanor, but if it's done in conjunction with another crime, and so the second crime was election crime, state and federal. It was like, oh no, the feds step in and you can't prosecute based on that, and therefore there wasn't a second crime, and therefore this wasn't a felony. That's a loser argument, the preemption argument, in my view, with all due respect. Then you have the argument that's come up here about, once again, that Juan Merchan, the judge, didn't recuse himself. This is now the fifth time I've heard this argument raised and rejected at various times in this case. Let's explain this once and for all. Juan Merchan presided over the case. His daughter, not him, his daughter worked for a Democratic fundraising entity in Chicago. There's no link between the judge and the daughter other than familial. There's no business link. He's not a partner in her firm. He doesn't get payments from his firm. He didn't work at the firm. He's not retired from the firm. He doesn't get payments from them. The daughter's allowed to have her own career, even if it's for Democrats. This is 2025, after all. The wife is allowed to have her own career. There is no evidence that Juan Merchan at all, in fact, quite the contrary, should be recused. He once made a $50 contribution to Act Blue. That was it. In New York, it is judges are elected. You run for office. So it's not unusual that they also will make a donation here and there. There was nothing about his rulings that were biased. There was nothing about his actions that were biased. And he was cleared by a judicial review committee about any wrongdoing. So once again, they're saying he was impartial. He was not impartial. He should have recused himself. I mean, ridiculous. They should be embarrassed. The lawyers here, Robert Giuffra, Matt Schwartz, James McDonald, and Maxwell Gottschall. I don't care how many Supreme Court justices you clerked for. You should be embarrassed by this filing. And why don't you at least drop a footnote to the American people and talk about your unholy and unethical relationship with Donald Trump, qua Donald Trump, and as president of the United States. And tell the American people that you were out doing the Trump administration's bidding at the same time you're trying to represent him in court and the ethical issues related to that. How about that? First Department Appellate Division should reject this appeal. He was not sentenced. He was sentenced to an unconditional discharge, keeps the felony on the book, but he'll never serve a day in prison. But he's a felon. He doesn't like that. This will go from here, whoever's the loser, and I think it'll be Trump, to the Court of Appeals. Now, Giuffra and Sullivan and Cromwell is also handling that fraud case in which they were successful at the First Department, not to get the fraud thrown out, but to get the $465 million fraud judgment amount reduced until it gets up to the Court of Appeals, where it is sitting. So this firm is handling both of these matters. So for me, it wasn't Trump files late night appeal. We were expecting that. We've been hearing about it for years. It's Sullivan and Cromwell and Robert Giuffra and what price they've paid to the devil in order to do this work. And I already see the benefit. I see you, Jay Clayton. Sure, you were in the first Trump administration. Sure, you were a golf buddy of Donald Trump. Got you the Securities and Exchange Commission position. And now you've been put in to the interim U.S. attorney for Manhattan. It's no coincidence that you came from Sullivan and Cromwell. That's a quid pro quo we'll continue to keep an eye on. So you're here on Legal AF. It's Tuesday. Lots of great interviews at the intersection of law and politics. Take a minute, come on over to the Legal AF Substack, become a paid member, and you'll also be able to get access to the brief that was just filed so you can read it for yourself. Until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.